at the Tavistock Hotel in London in the company of my old friend Geoffrey Cornelius. I think we probably met at the beginning of the 70s.
Yes, indeed.
So it's nearly 40 years.
It is. I was a young astrologer then.
And you came to France, I remember, in 1979, something like that, at Lille.
Right.
Some people I met recently Denis Labouret. He said he met you there.
At Lille, yes.
It started at Lille.
That's right,
Yeah.
that's right.
Okay, so I think, there was a time you were in charge of the Historical Lodge.
I was at that time, yes.
And then you created this mountain astrology, or I don't remember exactly.
No, Company of Astrologers.
Company of Astrology, yeah, that's Company of Astrology.
Yes.
And since we haven't been much in touch.
No.
Through the books anyway. I mean,
yes.
There was this famous book that you published, The Moment of Astrology.
Yes, that's right.
Which impressed quite a lot of people, even in France.
Right. That was 1994, yes.
1994.
Yes.
Yes.
And the second edition was
Okay.
2003.
Well, I must confess that I have not necessarily totally understood or grasped what was the message and the impact of the book. We might start with retrospectively what was the significance and the importance of this book.
All right, Jacques, yes. The book came out of many years of study and discussion with other astrologers, so it comes out of a whole phase of work from the early 70s, from getting into astrology.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes. Just.
And it represents the gradual evolution of a divinatory interpretation of horoscopy.
Yeah.
Now, let's see how to describe this. This is not really a popular approach amongst many ordinary astrologers, so it raises a major philosophical challenge. And there are historical roots for this. Now, I'm, in a sense, a critic of the whole classical tradition, therefore, because I'm offering a recension or a different interpretation of astrological practice. Now, but I can do that in such a way that all the forms of practice are left undisturbed. It's the theory underlying the practice that I'm challenging, which means that I can accept any of the forms of practice, but give a different explanation of what it is.
The practice is a fact. It's a phenomenon like this is a tree.
Yes.
It exists. I mean, not capable to understand why, but it does exist.
Yes.
You don't want the theory being able or having the right to challenge the practice. In fact.
No, in fact, I believe I'm interested in some reading of Pierre Bourdieu, the French.
Which one?
Pierre Bourdieu,
the
exactly. French sociologist.
Yes.
And his ideas of the relationship of theory and practice interest me very greatly. So there is a question that one can constitute theory that actually is somewhat counter to the actual practice that one conducts, and the two aren't necessarily in a direct relationship one with the other. And this has been for me the situation with the classical tradition from Ptolemy.
Oh, do you think that Ptolemy had the same attitude? He was making a statement of what was astrology.
Yes.
And that was it. And the explanation were sort of epiphenomenon.
Well, in a sense, he's, to put it oversimply perhaps, but he's rationalising an existing symbolic practice, and he's giving a very powerful rationalisation of that practice. The effect of that, of course, is then theory does then begin to impinge and slightly modify or remodify the practice itself.
Yes, exactly.
Ptolemaic theory then affects the very practice.
Yes. And to whom are you, when you say that, can we restitute the context to which you were opposed, in fact? It seems that you were opposed to a tendency which would go in the direction of the theory dominating the practice. Do you have examples of astrologers who were precisely going too far in this direction of imposing the theory to the practice, like for instance John Addy, I don't know, or someone else?
Well, first of all, on the issue of Ptolemy, we get the clear understanding that because of the theory, the Ptolemaic tradition then has difficulty with a number of practices which are ancient, of which the Catalan practices, interrogations, for instance, are uncomfortable within the Ptolemaic tradition.
He mentions it, but his duty is to mention, to make an inventory of everything which exists, and to explain some part of it.
Yes, indeed. So one doesn't find interrogations in Ptolemy or anything of that nature. And his explanation, as it is a rationalistic and naturalistic explanation, doesn't allow for a type of astrology that would be an astrology of the imaginative moment of any sort. That isn't Ptolemy's astrology.
Yes.
Hence there is a problem for every later practitioner who deviates from this naturalistic model.
Well, I must admit that my position is totally antagonistic to yours.
Yes.
From this point of view, although it's not really. I really think that this point of view, which is all, you know, the work of Patrice Guinard, probably.
Yes, I'm very interested in his work. Yes.
It goes well. If I am not exaggerating or deforming, is what he says. He seems to legitimate what astrology has become, according to a certain law, which would be that. Sort of what has become as was to become. There's a necessity for things to become what they are supposed to become.
Right.
And you share. No, it's not my position. You share this sort of attitude of legitimizing what astrology is and has become. Because, for instance, how do you introduce, for instance, to be more concrete, the new planets? Do you use them or not? After all, maybe you don't use them.
Right. Because of my understanding of the nature of practice, I see traditions slowly evolving and taking on new forms, much in the way that language does.
Yeah.
So my primary metaphor for astrology is a language metaphor.
Okay.
Now, therefore, language necessarily changes. It's neither good nor bad as it adopts new forms.
Yes.
Now, I'm therefore concerned, however, with practitioners and practice that becomes unreflexive and unmindful of its own traditional passage. So it concerns me the way in which, from Chiron onwards, asteroids, Chiron, trans-Neptunian bodies, that are then freely and loosely incorporated without any reflexivity or consideration by the astrologer concerned. Because, especially if it's attached to rather objective and materialistic attitude to the working of astrology, these things are then simply seen as additional information or additional factors, without understanding that we're working with a symbolic language where the introduction of a new symbol alters the shape of all the other existing symbols.
Yes.
As with the discovery of Uranus. So this is no small thing.
No.
But I'm a modern traditional astrologer, so I accept Uranus, Neptune, Pluto.
Yes, you do.
But because they've assimilated themselves into the language of modern astrology.
Thanks to their mythological denomination, between other things, which has been nicely given by the astronomers.
Yes, wonderfully so. Yes, so there's something true about this. In a matter of symbolism, I stop at Eris because I find it absurd that astrologers imagine that they can interpret a body that means discord and imagine they can have coherent language or interpretation with a very factor named discord, whose moon is dysnomia and misnaming. Astrology the symbol becomes a discord and a misnaming by the very use of the symbol.
So you're very much interested in the language and the name of the stars, in fact.
The language and the naming, which I regard as having a truthful revelation.
Yes. When you say revelation, no, is it not? You don't believe in a revelation of astrology, or is it what is the strength of this word in your own language?
Yes. What is the strength of the word?
Revelation. Because it may be many things, in fact.
Yes. Since I treat astrology as having in its working something spiritual, something that is supernatural rather than simply even preternatural or natural. There is something about this that is revealed as if by grace to us, to human beings. So that rather religious attitude to astrology,
I suppose,
underlies my understanding. Yes.
For instance, in France, I don't know if it is the same in England. They say that the planet appears at a significant moment.
Yes.
But it's not by chance that Neptune was discovered and named at in the 1840s, or Pluto in the 1930s.
Yes.
Do you go that far?
I would take that view, yes.
Yes.
That it's what appears to us in our world that we then interpret through symbol.
Yes.
That's it.
It's more or less like the comets, because at the time when the people were believing, there were people, for instance, who didn't believe in astrology, but they would believe in comets.
Yes.
Because astrology was sort of old thing which would come from the past, and the comets were a direct message.
Indeed.
And some theologians were not ready to refuse the comets, while they were ready to refuse astrology.
Yes. No, I understand.
And
that,
in a certain way, this Uranus-Neptune business has something to do, like the Nova Stella, the new star, the time of Tycho Brahe, some sort of astronomical miracle, which is nearly more important than the whole body of astrology.
Well, I don't take that view as such, but the idea that we're shown things in this way, I do accept. Yes.
Okay, let's come back to this conference where we come from.
Yes.
Can you give me your impressions about it, and maybe we could start from that, or what about the last discussion about Kepler or whatever?
Yes, because you filmed various parts of the conference. So
no, well, not really,
okay.
Not really. But yes, some elements. But
at least of English or British culture, and even Anglo-American culture, it is quite extraordinary because of the prestige of the Warburg Institute. It becomes extraordinary to have a setting where there can even be a meeting between practicing astrologers and academic astrologers.
It is not said like that. It is not presented like that. It is a fact, but it's not. The title doesn't say it's going to be a meeting between astrologers
in the text descriptions there are mentions that practitioners will be
okay, I missed that point. Really? Okay. Well.
Which means that it is very radical for the university to do this.
That's a more important,
and that radicality really rests with Charles Burnett, who has this desire to do this.
Yes, I remember I introduced once Charles Burnett to the Historical Lodge. There was one history of astrology day, and he came with me, and I brought the war book in the Astrological Lodge. Like in 1984, I brought the astrology to the war book.
Excellent.
Because I know Burnett from a long time ago, because he was also connected with history of Judaism, Arabic, etc. And my first formation was medieval.
Right, I understand.
So I met him very, very early.
Therefore, out of that inspiration, which is very much Charles' inspiration, there becomes this possibility, which is...
in 1984, it was not Burnett who was in charge. It was Parker. What was his name? Parker? This old man who
I'm not sure
who wrote a big book on Ficino or something or whatever.
Oh yes.
There was Francis Yates, and there was Donald. I don't remember his name.
Right. No, Charles was simply one of the lecturers here.
But it started before him.
Yes.
Okay. Well. For instance, yesterday we had a conference in Paris, and we have this sort of struggle between theoreticians and practitioners.
Yes.
And
but this is an astrological conference.
Yes, it was.
An astrological conference.
Yes. But there was aspects which were connected with history.
Yes.
And I think and Kepler, by the way, you are probably not in favor of Kepler, because Kepler precisely says that the practice should evolve to correspond to a sort of ideal astrology, which is more simpler, more transparent, more coherent. So you wouldn't call yourself Keplerian, Geoffrey Cornelius.
I'm not. But to me, Kepler's project grows organically out of astrology and out of his Platonic understanding. So I'm more rooted, I'm strongly influenced by Plato, so is Kepler. The direction that he moves is different to the direction I would move. Yes, I agree. But as I did try to say in that lecture, you cannot understand Kepler without understanding he comes from a universe or a conception of reality out of which astrology would naturally grow.
Yes.
In some form or other.
Oh yes, it was obvious. It was obvious. It was something which was natural for him to believe.
Yes, it's natural for him. Yes.
Yeah. So I would like to know to which point, for instance, let us imagine that one would discover a major mistake in the transmission of the historical tradition, which might which might have an impact on the way astrologers practice. That couldn't be imaginable for you.
No,
it couldn't happen. It could happen that practitioners would have to change their practice because of obvious problems with their own tradition, which would have been rediscovered or reinterpreted in a very obvious way, which would not coincide with their practice. I will give you an example. The question of, you know about the rulerships.
What aspect? I use rulerships.
Yes, you use rulerships. Okay. Let's just imagine that someone would say, well, why Moon and Sun would rule Cancer and Leo, and not Gemini and Cancer, for instance.
Right.
And you know why this question can be asked? Because the solstitial axis passes not between Cancer and Leo, but between Gemini and Cancer.
Yes.
So there seems to have been a sort of shift, because according to Ptolemy, the Cancer and Leo create a sort of symmetrical axis.
Yes.
For the double houses,
Yes.
But on the other hand, this axis doesn't coincide with the solstitial axis, which passes one sign earlier or later, whatever. You see. So let us imagine, without entering into this scenario, that we would say, well, one of the explanations is the sidereal shift.
Yes.
Okay. That is that duality. That is, for instance, the planet. One would have confused the sidereal reality, which have been, for instance, Gemini Cancer, and tropically it becomes Cancer Leo, for instance. But symbolically, it still has to respect the axis. So in fact, well, I don't want to develop more of that idea, but I just give the example as a sort of just hypothesis that it might bring changes in the practice if this consciousness of something having been wrong in a way at a certain moment might have to be accepted. I think that might have to be changed and redefined, for instance. What would you say in this hypothesis that something very obvious should be changed and which would forced to reconsider the practice? Does the practice have always the last word, in a way?
It's a most complex matter to answer your question.
I'm sorry.
It needs to be taken at several different levels I must try to answer it because it's very important. The level at which, when you talk of mistake, at a level of there are levels of technique that we need to consider. I would be troubled with my astrology if I had to alter what I call the symbolic arrays, the broad symbolic arrays attached to each planet, which are very traditional and of consistent with our tradition. The broad meanings of Saturn, Mars, Jupiter, broadly speaking. Now, if I had to alter that, that would mean I was thinking a different astrology. So let me stop my Maggie's here, and then I'll carry on answering. I can best express the subtlety of these positions with an example. Very recently I've heard Hellenistic astrologers researching Hellenistic material, saying that through our studies we might be able to determine which is the correct technique to use. And that's a move I reject. It's not my move. Similarly, if somebody were to say to me, we might discover which is the best health system to use, I reject this move, because I would say it's not a matter of correct or incorrect. As with language, it is that which expresses that which wishes to be expressed. It's how you speak the language. A crisis will emerge in astrology not as a result of this or that technique at the technical level, but at the point at which philosophically it finds itself unable to express itself, or astrologers find they cannot give proper philosophic expression to what they're doing, and everything they say they do is mismatched with their practice. That begins to create a crisis. That is where theory of astrology does in fact hinder the astrologers, because the rationalisation they might give doesn't match what they actually do, neither does it satisfy them philosophically. My criticism of the Ptolemaic tradition. Hence, Jacques, you see, because my interest is in divination and symbol, I come into astrology with that formulation. I'm quite comfortable with talking with a sidereal astrologer or an Indian astrologer. I haven't mastered their techniques particularly, but I can rapidly move to the position of reading things their way. We will be in trouble if they adopt different symbolic arrays. So if I come across an astrologer, say an Aztec astrologer, who's interpreting Venus quite differently to my interpretation of Venus, I'll have to completely readjust my way of moving. But because I'm a symbolist, I will then adjust to their language of symbolism. So the issue isn't, once one understands the nature of symbol, and symbol as used in divination, one will cut through many secondary problems at a technical level. Then one sees, yes, I have a certain technical formulation, just as I speak the language English and I don't speak other languages. I can learn or half speak some other languages, but I prefer not to mix up my languages. I prefer to speak in English with somebody English or a French person speaking English.
But
then we communicate. So I can speak to an astrologer practiced in my form of astrology, and we communicate.
Well, the problem is that I'm very much interested in languages,
yes.
And as you probably know, English is a rather bad example because it has changed much.
Yes,
it has transformed its nature from a Germanic language to something which is much more Latin.
Yes.
And the content, the essence of the language, is something which has become rather relative because of the fact that there were so many foreign influences, But we cannot only define a language by the fact it is used to understand something. It is also, it bears also, it has also a certain content. It has also a certain wisdom, a certain significance. It's also a matter of discussion. But there are also different ways of defining what is a language.
Of course, Jacques, but as you perhaps realise from what I was saying yesterday, if you were there, my limited knowledge of these things, but I'm very interested in de Saussure's distinction between lang and parole. And there's a tendency in Western thought as a whole, to look at run and structure and not look at discourse, context and the actual situation that we're in, practical situation. Now I'm much more interested in the practical situation of any interpretation and the context it's in, rather than trying to establish some fixed syntax that is an absolute syntax of true astrology.
And my last question would be connected with the last discussion there was at the Orbo.
Yes.
That based on astrology, would you think that there would be a difference between astrology, which would describe the natural course of things, and astrology, which would catch also the accidents in incidents of life or of society?
There is a difference because we come here to a difference of orientation that's fundamental. In one of the lectures this weekend, which you might not have seen, a discussion was given of the religious criticisms in Islam in the 10th and 11th centuries by religious scholars against astrology. And this is a very typical Aristotelian critique. Ibn Hazm said there are two types of astrologer. One of them is deluded, and the other one is a heretic and should be executed.
Yes.
And the astrologer who is deluded simply thinks that there is the signs of astrology do give physical signs of what's happening and can be read as a type of science. That is an illusion. They are deluded, but we forgive them. The other type of astrologer who believes there is intelligence involved, revelation, angels, supernatural, that is heresy, and that must be executed. Now, I see that's a very accurate observation, because there are two modes of approach within divination and within astrology itself, and that categorises two different types of astrology. Beneath technique, you see both astrologers to be using the same techniques, but they have these different attitudes. Because I am interested in divination and omens, I see an astrology that actually deals with the actual events of contingent particulars. That's what divination does. However, with whatever faults and failures, that's what it does. And it does that with regard to a certain spiritual understanding, supernatural understanding, call it what you like. And that is different to an objectified and materialistic understanding of astrology. And in that sense, I'm closer to being a Platonist than I am to being an Aristotelian. Very fundamental. So I regard that as an important divide of attitude in astrology.
Yes, in fact, there is not only one astrology, in fact. I mean, there is an astrology which stays in the general fields, which doesn't want to enter into the specificality of things.
Yes.
And which is rather pure in certain way.
Yes, it can be.
And another which has to treat the complexity and diversity of the word, as the language does, you know.
Yes, exactly.
And the problem is that this sort of astrology, second astrology, has much to do with divination.
Yes, it does. Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, Ibn Hazm identified this first heretical type as being like magic.
Yes.
Therefore, he would see this immediately.
Yes.
Yes. And all the great thinkers in the tradition have observed this division of attitude. So that exists with no technique. Although it will shape what an astrologer actually does in practice, they can still be using the very same technical methods in astrology.
So now you are in Canterbury? You live in Canterbury?
Canterbury, yes.
What is your email?
I'll give you an email.
Because I would like to continue the conversation.
Yes.
Otherwise.